It has now been more than 5 years since my introduction to the Monster Hunter franchise, a franchise I hold very dear. It is by far my favorite game series and I have many good memories from playing it over the years. I enjoy it to the point I feel the need to express said enjoyment in some way, shape or form, and this project is exactly that, a love letter to the franchise. In this video series, I will cover my experience with these games chronologically and give my thoughts and opinions on each entry I played, as well as use each chapter to express one of the 3 big aspects as to why I love these games, as well as covering some great monsters in every game. So, with that out of the way, here's part 1 of Monster Hunter is great. Here's why. It's the year 2015 and my younger self is on a skiing school trip. In the evening, I visited some of my friends in their room. They had smuggled their PlayStation Vitas with them on the trip and were playing a game I had never heard of. It was Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. I remember being fascinated by the concept of a game where you could only fight bosses, as my friend described it to me. Now me being a kid who was always fascinated by dinosaurs and other kinds of real or fictional creatures, I was immediately interested. And after the trip was over, I wanted to get my hands on one of these games. But since Freedom Unite was only available for PlayStation Portable, I had to find one for my console, the Nintendo 3DS. When I visited the local video game store, I found this game on the shelves, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. I bought it then and there, and for the next month or so I played this game whenever I could. This included secretly grinding for the next armor set in the middle of the night before an exam. And hiding the DS under the pillow, then pretending to sleep whenever my parents would check on me. Good times. 3U is special for me, because it's the only old-style game I extensively played. I dipped my toes into Generations, but I only borrowed it, so I can't really have a nuanced opinion about it. 3U on the other hand, I played for 300 hours at that time, which might not be a lot for many series veterans, but for myself, it was way more than I ever invested at any other game at this stage of my life, maybe excluding Minecraft. I got almost to the end of G rank, but hit a wall with Stygian Zinogre, which I just couldn't beat as a kid. Since my parents at that time didn't allow online play, I had no way to get help for this quest, so I stopped playing. For those of you who don't know, Monster Hunter is a game series where you start out as a puny little hunter who is tasked to go out on missions slaying threats to your home village. You start out killing small raptors and other low tier monsters. You carve them and gather their materials, then craft gear out of said materials. Now you're able to tackle stronger monsters, and the cycle repeats. So now that we are all on the same page, what is there to say about Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate? Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate is one of the 2 entries which features underwater combat, a mechanic that while generally being very divisive, I very much enjoyed. The swimming felt great to me and it made very cool monster fights possible. The option to move not only horizontally but in all directions also made dodging and positioning interesting. Other notable differences from this generation are the companions, the Shakalaka. In most Monster Hunter games you have cats as companions, but in this game you have these weird little creatures that can be equipped with different masks. These can influence their behavior on the battlefield. There's Cha-Cha and there's Kayamba. Even though I really like the cats, I have a certain nostalgia towards these guys. Many of the monsters introduced in the 3rd generation are considered series classics, and I myself have a lot of favorites in this game. When I look at the monster rosters from previous generations and compare it to this one, I just feel it is just way more diverse, since not everything is a dragon. I do know the crabs and monkeys are missing from this game, but still. When I replayed it recently, I realized just how many aspects of it I enjoy. But what surprised me was how easy it was for me to breeze through low and high rank. Especially the latter was much easier than I remembered. So it seems as a kid I was just a big noob. Well. But enough of that. For now I want to talk about this video's big reason as to why I love the Monster Hunter games. The monsters. Shocker, I know. Video game bosses are more often than not the best part of a game for me. And rightfully so, since a good boss tests your knowledge of a game and challenges you. They are designed to stick out from the basic enemies, since you most likely will spend more time fighting them than the basic goons. Now, like we already established previously, Monster Hunter basically only consists of boss fights. Hunts take between 10 to 30 minutes, which means when you are playing through one of these games, every monster you encounter has at least a chance to make a lasting impression on you. But they are a bit more than just a big enemy. Since the very beginning, Capcom tried to make the monsters of Monster Hunter like the animals we see on Earth. They have their behaviors, their biology, their lives. Something that is particularly expanded upon in later entries like World, but was at least partly present from the start. Monsters get exhausted after fighting, need to eat, flee from conflict they fear is too dangerous, or go to sleep if they are weak. Most of the intro cutscenes depict them living in a world and behaving like a big predatory animal would behave. In the Hunter's Notes one can learn many different facts about these creatures, and their more animalistic nature is not only reflected in their behavior, but in their design too. If you look at the features of the monsters more closely, you can spot a lot of details that have their purpose beyond just looking cool. All of this combined makes them in my eyes so much more interesting than most bosses in other video games. I recently watched a video which perfectly describes my feelings on the monsters and why they feel so real. The monsters of Monster Hunter may not be realistic, but they feel grounded through their design, sound and so on. What is meant by that? Let's look at an example. Jhen Mohran. This ginormous whale-like monster lives in a massive desert and swims through the sand like a fish through water. It even has the ability to jump out of it, like a shark catching a seal. Now, this is something that is not possible when looked at from a scientific standpoint. It would be absurd to think that something this big could propel itself to this height out of sand and not break every bone of its body when crashing down, even if it would be able to jump this high. So why does this not break the immersion of the battle? Simple. Through the sound design portraying the absolute weight of him jumping out of the sand and landing, the weight of this creature does not get compromised. Its movements are not extremely fast, thus it still comes off as slow during its animations. And it does not simply boost out of the sand with magical powers, but prepares for it by diving down and recovers after re-entering the sand, like a whale would if it were to jump out of the water. Even years before Monster Hunter World would go the extra mile in making sure the monsters feel like believable creatures living in a fantasy world, the old games tried to always make sure the monsters would have an explanation for their abilities. Now you might be wondering, why should I care as a casual player? What do I gain from knowing why a monster has features on its body that help it survive in its ecosystem? Well, here's how Capcom integrated this possibly unnecessary trivia into the fights with these creatures. Let's take Barryoff as an example. He's a flying wyvern living in the Arctic region and is built for movement on ice and other slippery surfaces. For stability, his species evolved spikes on its front limbs to support his claws in gripping the ground and allowing him to be swift on the ice. Barryoff is a fast monster and can quickly jump behind a hunter, making him a dangerous foe. When he was introduced in Iceborne, many new hunters hit a hard wall with him because he outplayed them easily, but a hunter knowing the fact about his arms will target them first during a hunt. When they break, Barryoff loses the ability to swiftly jump around, as he slips whenever he repositions, making it much easier to hit him. Another example would be Zinogre, a fanged wyvern that has strong electrical powers. These originate from thunderbugs living in its fur, and during a hunt, Zinogre will coil them and charge up until he reaches a charged up state, in which he is very dangerous. But if you knock him down during this state and pull out your bug net, you can actually catch some of these bugs from his back and thus snatch up some extra materials. But even if you ignore all of this, these beasts still deliver engaging fights, which justify their association as monsters. The way you approach a new fight is always with caution, to learn the movement of the enemy. I love this approach to battle, because it's very rewarding to master, and almost every monster provides that. In the first try you may get stomped and thrown in the trash, but this is good. Only like this do you truly learn the mechanics of these games. Admittedly, the monsters where I finally learned how to play the game were not the early ones, but it was the thing I needed back then. But a hunt in a Monster Hunter game does not only consist of battle. When you enter a hunt, you first need to track the monster down. Then, when you find it, you need to mark it, so when it flees you know where it's heading. The monster has no health bar, so you don't know exactly when it will die. You need to pay attention if it limps. And if it does, you can even choose to capture it. Things like these give the fights in Monster Hunter a unique dynamic, one I didn't find in any other game to this day. And they satisfy both my inner biologist and the guy that needs to stab big creatures. I think now's the perfect time to take a closer look at some of these monsters. Lagiacrus is the first monster that makes a big impression on the player. A thunder leviathan which fights underwater and on land and has features of crocodiles and eels. The spikes on his back are the origin of his electrical power and give him the ability to shock the water around him. You first stumble upon him on a very early mission collecting monster guts, and you're not really expected to fight him, but rather to run away. You later learn that the residents of Moga village suspect that he is the origin of the dangerous earthquakes plaguing the village. Your mission is now to get strong enough to defeat him, and after playing through most of low rank, you can finally face him. Lagiacrus is a very fun fight because he's very intimidating, especially underwater, and he combos you easily if you're not careful. but when you learn his moveset he becomes a very satisfying fight to master, with how good you can punish his attacks, with how many part breaks he has, which is great for a hammer player like me. I also love the weapon and armor design his equipment has, making this one of the first monsters I farmed to get all of its gear. So yeah, this fight is a prime example for the underwater combat from this generation at its best. This is one of the best examples of how weird the monsters can get. Gigginox is a flying wyvern that resides in caves. It is completely blind and relies on an organ that detects the body heat of nearby creatures. His main weapon is its potent poison, which can be spitted or released from pores under his body. His specialized feet are able to stick to surfaces, allowing him to climb on the ceiling during the hunt. The best way to describe him would be a mixture of a dragon and a leech. Many people think his fight is slow and his gimmick of sticking to the ceiling is annoying, but I disagree. There's a similar monster like this in the series, but in my opinion is much more annoying with the same mechanics. Gigginox is fast and aggressive. He loves to combo you with its poison attacks, and is a fight where I feel poison is much more of a threat than during most other fights. When he goes to the ceiling he can jump on top of you, spit poison balls, or literally devour you. He's a creepy monster done right, and I really wish he would return in a newer game. Maybe in the sequel to World. Brachydios is a brood wyvern, commonly found in the volcanic regions. In contrast to other brood wyverns, he has very developed forearms and uses them to fight you, which already makes him stick out as a unique monster, since most brood wyverns have more T-Rex-like front limbs. But that's not it. Those arms are also covered with a slime mold. This slime reproduces by exploding and spreading its spores that way, and Brachydios uses this to his advantage. They form a symbiosis. Brachydios lets the slime grow on his arms and horn and gains a lot of attack power that way. The slime gets to spread through his fighting more than it could on its own. In addition, the saliva of Brachy works as a fertilizer for the slime. So when it licks his arms, it lets the slime grow back very fast. This is just one of the examples of how Monster Hunter takes a ridiculous concept, a boxer T-Rex that has exploding fists, and applies believable biologic reasons behind the abilities of the monster. This is also the monster that properly taught me the game. Before that, I managed to kill most monsters on my first or second try, without really struggling, but he wiped the floor with me. After my third or fourth time failing the quest, I started to consider that I might have to change my approach when fighting against him. So I upgraded and adapted my equipment, and I also brought with me more than just potions. I used everything I could, from demon drugs to traps to flash bombs. And after a few more tries in close battles, I finally slayed him. I think everybody has this one monster that forces one to actually learn every aspect of hunting. And he is that to me. Brachy is also a very fun fight. The slime puddles he leaves force you to pay attention to not only the monster, but to the environment as well. And when enraged, his body heats up to the point that the slime explodes not over time, but on contact, which makes him literally punch explosions. And this hard fight made the crafting of the weapons from him all the more satisfying. The Dios hammer is still one of my favorite hammers to this day. The same way Brachy is still my favorite monster. After a pause of over 4 years, I really enjoyed replaying this game and remembering my first journey as a kid through it. The idea to make this video just kind of came to me while I was playing, and it was a lot of fun to make. Because this video was already longer than I had planned, I had to hold back on so many aspects I wanted to touch upon, like the old zone or armor system, and talk about little gimmicks that are no longer in the games, like the flexing after drinking a potion. Playing an older title after experiencing the newer games for hundreds of hours really is refreshing. But even if I had fun, I couldn't help to miss some parts that over the years just became integral to my true enjoyment of these games. Like I already mentioned, as a kid, online play was prohibited for me, and none of my friends wanted to play this game at the time. So I was stuck playing this game by myself, while I had other games I could play with my friends. This was eventually the reason I dropped the game in favor for said multiplayer games. Little did I know that just a few years later, an announcement would bring me back into the series, and not alone. Next time, we will look at this entry, and what reason for enjoying the series it introduced to me. But for now, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.